Ehlers Danlos Syndrome and why I don't talk about it as much as POTS. I hope to change that, and I feel like I owe you an explanation. A few of you have asked. So I did the original POTS story back in 2019 when I was a news anchor at WPDE in the Myrtle Beach, South Carolina market. That was when I was diagnosed with POTS and Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. And the reason that I did a story, I did mention Ehlers Danlos Syndrome in that story, but it was definitely much more focused on POTS. And here's why. At the time, I felt like POTS was what was impacting me a whole lot more. And I also realized that there were all these people out there who had this condition, whether they had Ehlers Danlos or not, who had this condition, and these doctors didn't know about it, and there were a whole lot of them. Ehlers Danlos syndrome is still considered rare. However, the hypermobile type that I have is not. So neither POTS nor my specific type of Ehlers Danlos syndrome are actually considered rare conditions. They're just really poorly understood, and a lot of people and a lot of doctors don't know about them. So why didn't I post about it more? And why did you not see me talking about Ehlers Danlos syndrome as much until fairly recently, like within the last 2 years? Because I didn't believe I had it. This is like the first time I'm admitting this publicly. I thought I was misdiagnosed because that, for whatever reason, like mentally, the Ehlers Danlos syndrome diagnosis was so hard for me to accept. POTS was too, but I had a tilt table test and I had a catecholamine blood test to show me how my body was malfunctioning. So it was very clear to me that I had POTS, and I also fit the symptoms of POTS to a T. So there was no doubt in my mind I had POTS. I'm classic POTS, very clearly had POTS. Ehlers Danlos syndrome, on the other hand, it's a genetic condition that they say, that means I was born with it. And it's like, how did I go with my entire life without knowing I had this condition? On top of that, I don't have all of the, do you notice how I wiggle around in all my videos? It's because I move my feet and I move my leg. I'm currently sitting with my legs crisscrossed. Like, that's a total POTS Ehlers Danlos thing. The blood pooling, I have to get my feet up and I just get really uncomfortable, so I move my legs all the time. So sorry. Anyway, Ehlers Danlos syndrome. I don't feel like I have severe symptoms of Ehlers Danlos syndrome. I don't have a lot of the comorbidities that go with it. POTS, certainly, but Chiari malformation, I don't have that. I've been checked. Tethered cord, I don't have that. I've been checked. So some of these other conditions that go right along with it, craniocervical instability, I don't have that. My neck is hypermobile, but I don't, as of now, have not been diagnosed with CCI. So some of these other conditions that go along with Ehlers Danlos syndrome, I don't have. Then on top of that, I don't dislocate. Now, to be clear, not all people with Ehlers Danlos syndrome actually dislocate. So I was sitting there, newly diagnosed, going, how the heck have I had this genetic disorder my whole life and I didn't know about it? Are they sure? Then the real reason I didn't want to believe it, because I hoped if I had a different cause of developing POTS, the cause would be curable and I would be cured. If I had Ehlers Danlos syndrome, there was no curing this. So a lot of it was that I didn't want to believe it. I didn't feel like I was bad enough. I didn't feel like I was suffering enough. It's not a competition, and I've learned that now. Sickness is not a competition. We are also very different. Nobody deserves any element of sickness. Whether you are on the mild end or the severe end, neither of you deserve this. I don't either. So I had trouble accepting the Ehlers Danlos diagnosis, so I didn't talk about it because I wasn't confident in that diagnosis in the beginning. We have a joke in my family where we say, oh, but you don't have Ehlers Danlos syndrome. My mom says it to me. She's like, but you don't have Ehlers Danlos syndrome. It's become literally a family joke because it took me years to accept that I had Ehlers Danlos syndrome. I would literally stand there with my mom and bend my fingers backwards and be like, I don't know. That's just one little piece. I don't have Ehlers Danlos syndrome. And she'd be like, yeah, you don't have Ehlers Danlos syndrome. Okay. So how do they diagnose hypermobile Ehlers Danlos syndrome? It's with something called the Didnt scale, which I refer to as the funny physical. After I was diagnosed with POTS, my doctor sat there and he was trying to figure out what triggered the POTS. I hadn't had a virus. I hadn't had an infection recently, which are common triggers of POTS. So then he started doing what I refer to as the funny physical. He checked my joints. He said, can you good Lord, can you bend your fingers backwards? And I said, oh yeah, I can do that. And I started bending my fingers backwards. And I'm thinking, I've been doing that my whole life, no big deal. Why does he care? Then he checked my elbows and they hyperextend. And he said, have you always been told you're double jointed? And I said, yes. And again, I was a cheerleader, a gymnast, and a dancer all growing up. So why did this matter? I just thought I was flexible. And then my knees are a little bit hypermobile, not significantly, but they are a little bit. And I can bend myself over and put my hands flat on the floor without stretching, without bending my knees. These are all just things that seemed perfectly normal to me. He asked me if I had ever had any strange scarring issues or stretch marks. Well, when I was 12, I got stretch marks all over my hips and I hadn't had a major growth spurt yet. I was really little and I thought I was fat. But like the age of 12, I thought I was overweight when I was so little. I was just hadn't even grown yet. So I said, yes, I had stretch marks when I was really young and it sort of made no sense. I remember my mom going, are those stretch marks, when she saw them on my hips? And I said, I don't know, is that what they are? Those little squiggly lines? And she said, yeah, we don't really have those in our family. That's so strange. And again, I hadn't been through a major growth spurt, so it was odd. Not odd enough to take me to a doctor though. So that was another sign. I had headaches when I was really little, and they weren't so debilitating until probably high school, but I think people didn't take me seriously. I think they just thought I was probably mimicking my older sister. She's 10 years older than me. She would get headaches. And I think, when I'm 5 years old saying I have a headache, I think they probably just thought I was trying to be cool like my sister. Additionally, I started complaining of back pain in middle school. We attributed that to being a cheerleader. By 8th grade, I had finally had a little growth spurt and I was no longer a flyer. I was the person lifting the girls. And so we just assumed that the back pain was because I was doing all that lifting. I was also praised from a very young age for being quote unquote flexible. I could do the splits. I could put my legs behind my head. I can still do that. And I was just very bendy. And again, I was doing gymnastics, cheerleading, and dance. So these were things that were good for the activities that I was participating in. So it didn't seem out of the norm. Turns out these were all signs and symptoms of Ehlers Danlos Syndrome that I had my whole life that I didn't realize were signs and symptoms of a medical condition. I thought they were just me. So when my doctor said you have Ehlers Danlos Syndrome and explained it to me, I thought, that doesn't make sense. That's just me. That's not a medical condition. I don't have a medical condition. It has taken me years to realize that I have Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. It's also really hard because there's no genetic test. You can't take blood and show that you have Ehlers Danlos Syndrome type 3 or hypermobile Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, which is what I have. I had the full EDS panel done to check for other types of EDS. There are more than 10 types of EDS. Hypermobile EDS is strictly diagnosed based on clinical presentation, so that Didnt scale I was telling you about. So unlike POTS, I didn't have a true like test. I know the scale is technically a test, but it's really just a physical. So I didn't have anything to prove that I had this. I didn't feel like I was severe enough. So I just thought I didn't have it for a while. I went to the Ehlers Danlos clinic at the Mayo Clinic location in Jacksonville. And I literally said to the main doctor who treats the EDS patients, he did the Didnt scale on me. He checked, did the whole check the list off for all my symptoms. And I said, do I have Ehlers Danlos Syndrome? This is so ridiculous. And he goes, yeah, you have Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. I go, are you sure? Like, are you really sure? Yeah. And my mom's sitting there with me and she's dying laughing. And she goes, no, she doesn't have Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. She doesn't think she has Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. And I was like, I need you to tell me, like, you're positive. Like, you see this all the time. You wouldn't make a mistake, right? So I have Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. That's why it took me a while to get comfortable talking about it. I promise I will try to do more on that because that needs awareness just like POTS, just like so many other conditions. So many of us are living with these conditions that just need so much more education in the medical community and more awareness in society so that we can live a little bit of a better life when people are a little bit more understanding. And for those of you who don't know, Ehlers Danlos Syndrome is a connective tissue disorder. It is considered genetic. So your connective tissue makes up all sorts of things in your body that you need. A lot of the symptoms of EDS are wide-ranging, kind of like POTS. Overly bendy. So there's a difference between being flexible and being hypermobile. Flexibility can be, you can work up to that. Hypermobility is something your body does, like when my joints are hypermobile and they hyperextend, or some people are called double jointed. That is hypermobility versus flexibility. Stretchy skin can be one of the symptoms of EDS. My skin is not terribly stretchy, which was another reason I had trouble believing I had this, but not all EDS patients have the stretchy skin. So this is considered a spectrum condition. Some people have lots and lots of symptoms and they are very, very severe. Others have much milder symptoms. Many EDS patients will develop POTS, which is why my original POTS doctor, my cardiologist at Vanderbilt, when he diagnosed me with POTS, that's why he knew to look for that, because there is a lot of overlap between those conditions. EDS can affect the entire body, joint dislocations, widespread pain, and it can cause a lot of other comorbid conditions. So like POTS, mast cell activation syndrome, gastrointestinal issues, there are all sorts of overlapping conditions, Chiari malformation, craniocervical instability, tethered cord syndrome, just to name a few, and that's certainly not all of them. As for treatment for EDS, there's not a whole lot. Kind of like POTS, it's really about treating the symptoms, physical therapy, and symptom control, pain management, these kinds of things. There's no cure for EDS right now. So it's it can be a bit of a tough condition. I will always spread resources to all of you. I'll always tell you if I don't know something, because I want you to make sure you know that you can come to me and to my page for reliable medical and health information. So I'm not super knowledgeable on EDS as much as I am on POTS. So I do hope to share more about EDS with you. It's important, but I think Cortney does a phenomenal job educating. So I would encourage you to go follow her, and she's on Instagram and on TikTok. She's awesome. So that is why I haven't shared as much about Ehlers Danlos syndrome as I have about POTS, because it took me a while to believe that I had it.